Okay, well, I guess firstly, thanks very much, Paula and Gordon, and for all the conference organisers for the opportunity to speak with you today. Ethics is such an important issue, and just picking up on Jason's comments there, you can see some of the challenges. There's a really close nexus between ethics, privacy and security, and as researchers, you all play such an important role in ensuring your research is done in an ethical way, which goes to the quality of your research, but also then the trust that the public has in the research. So it's all very closely twinned with things that are really important to me and in my role, and that's what I'll focus my comments on today. So the heading here is the Data Availability and Transparency Scheme. And this is, or Transparency Act, and given the name of the Act, the acronym becomes the Data Scheme, which seems very appropriate because it's a scheme for sharing data collected by Australian government agencies. So we call it the Data Scheme. And I think, as it's touched on in the introduction, it's a best practice scheme. We think about it as a best practice scheme. This is a challenge because it's a PDF. I think I'm going to have to move through the PDF, and then how do I get back to share the screen? I don't know. Oh, here we go. I've done it. Okay. How's that in terms of people's visual? Can you see? Yep, great. I'm getting the thumbs up there. Okay, so what we've tried to capture here on a page is the essence of this new scheme for sharing Australian government data. So if I take you to the middle of the page, they're the data custodians. They're Australian government agencies that collect a whole lot of data that's extremely valuable and useful for research purposes. And you can think single touch payroll collected by the Australian Tax Office, information on environmental assets, fauna, etc., collected by our by the Commonwealth Department of Environment. You can think about data on the energy market collected by the Department of Climate Change, but also a range of other Australian government related entities. So lots there. Health data, I guess, particularly for this audience, things like the Medicare Benefits Scheme, the Australian Immunisation Register, the Pharmaceutical Benefits Scheme. That data can all be twinned with information about education, income, and help us to understand people's life journey and the interaction there between health and how they're travelling. So much information that's available for use. Then we have what we call accredited users. Now, to make a request for that data under the scheme, you need to be accredited as a user. And the entities that can become accredited are Australian government agencies, Australian universities, and state and territory government agencies. So once you're accredited, and it's great to see that we've recently accredited our first university, which is UNSW, and hope others will follow soon. So someone like UNSW and their researchers can make requests, using this scheme, can make requests to Australian government agencies for data that they hold or for which they're custodians. And custodians don't have to say yes, but they are encouraged to say yes. And if they say no or refuse your request, they're required to give reasons why and reasons in writing. Now, in the exchange of the data, that can be done between the two parties. So it could be done between a researcher at UNSW. Yes, Paula?
Sorry, Gayle. We've got a couple of requests asking if you could just slide the screen down a little bit, because people can only see down to the very top of data requests. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And I should say too, we can make these slides available for those that are participating as well via the conference organisers. Yeah, so say a UNSW researcher can exchange the data, say, with the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare, or can exchange the data via what's called a data service provider. And that data service provider think entities like the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare or the Australian Bureau of Stats, but there may also be other state and territory government agencies that will provide these services, and indeed universities as well, where they're doing de-identification of the data or complex integration of the data. And also the third service there for data service providers is providing secure access. So they're the three types of players in the scheme, and sometimes it's useful to exchange that data via, how's that? Hopefully that's even better. Okay, I'm getting the thumbs up. Thank you, Alice. So sometimes you can just exchange it between yourselves, but other times it'll be important that you use a data service provider. So that's the sort of transactional piece, if you like. But let me just step you through some of the safeguards which go to the ethics issues and other issues. And as I say, are really important in terms of the quality of the research that we're doing, but also in terms of maintaining and building the public's trust in our use of the data. So we can think about the data that's held by Australian government agencies really as a public asset. And so one of the important safeguards is the purpose for which you're using the data and the purposes that are permitted under the Act. So the Act's very powerful in the sense that it authorises Australian government agencies to share their data. So it can override existing legislative barriers, for example, secrecy provisions. It's very powerful, but the quid pro quo is you really have to use all of these safeguards. So the first point is that it must be for the right purpose. And that goes to better government services, better government policies and programs, and then also research and development. So provided the data is being used for those purposes, then that's permissible under the data scheme. The second point is around accreditation. I touched on this before, and this is really a key role that I play and my team plays, is really giving organisations a tick of approval, if you like, and allowing them to participate in the scheme. So we look very closely at your data governance and management arrangements. We also look very closely at your ICT and other security settings, and we look very closely at your people capability. And if you've got all of those things in place, then you get the tick of approval and you can participate in the scheme, which means you can make a request for data and you can receive the data and then make use of it. The bottom box there is around the data request process, which I touched on before. You make a request, if the custodian agrees to that, then away you go. You enter into a data sharing agreement. And a lot of this will be familiar to you. You need to, when you enter into that data sharing agreement, you need to apply their best practice data sharing principles. Some of you will recognize these as the 5 states. It's all about making sure you've got the right project, the right people, the right setting, the right data, and the right output. And that picks up on privacy issues, also importantly picks up on ethics issues and picks up on the security dimension as well. Once you've got your data sharing agreement in place with the data custodian, then you register. I register that data sharing agreement. It's publicly available. This is a really important piece of the story as well. It's the transparency piece. So one of the things I have to do is keep a register of all the accredited scheme participants, and also of all of the data sharing agreements, and do an annual report. And this is a way to help the public understand. After all, it's their data, right? And helping them to understand what data is being shared with who and for what purpose. And so that's a really important part of my role around the transparency, and really sets a standard for us all to adhere to. And then the last piece is around this regulation piece, which is the first part of that is a complaints function. So if you are making a request for data and or you've entered into your data sharing agreement and you're concerned about the behaviour of other scheme participants, then there's a process there for you and others to raise complaints about how those participants are playing, and also about the scheme itself. So that's a really valuable function from my perspective, because it gives us insights. It gives us all insights into what's happening in the scheme and helps us to think about how we can have a better system and improve that system over time to share the data and make the best use of the data. Because I guess the sort of shared objective here is the scheme is all about increasing the availability and use of data collected by Australian government data to deliver better public purposes or public benefit, if you like. So that's the goal, but we need to do that in a safe way, and it directs the traffic and gives you guidance on how to do that sharing in a safe and responsible way. So there are also other provisions, other regulatory powers for the National Data Commissioner. I can give directions or take regulatory action if there's performance or people are playing not in the way we're looking for them to play. So that's the whole idea of the scheme. Up in the top banner there, you can see the role of the National Data Commissioner. That's established by the Act. The scheme's established by the Act. The Act establishes the National Data Commissioner to oversee the scheme, regulate, provide advice to the Minister and others on the scheme, also to educate and provide guidance to scheme participants and others on best practice data use and handling. There's a National Data Advisory Council that advises me on how to go about our business. And importantly, some tools down in that bottom blue banner there. The first is work we're doing around data discovery, and one of those is building an Australian government data catalogue. We're working with agencies to develop their data, Australian government agencies to develop their data inventories and have them complete and up to date, and then the Australian government data catalogue will draw on those inventories. It'll be available on DataPlace, which is the platform for you to manage your data sharing with Australian government agencies. So when you go to put your data request in, once the catalogue's built, the idea is that you can search the catalogue to find the data you're looking for and who holds it, and then that taps you in to make your data request. And then it can tap you through further on DataPlace to enter into your data sharing agreement, to register your data sharing agreement, and manage all of those interactions with Australian government agencies, and give you one place where you can store all of that information. And as the DataPlace takes you through your request and through your data sharing agreement, what it also does is ensures you adhere to the best practices and really gives you the best chance of complying with the scheme. So that's the scheme in a nutshell. I'd encourage you to think about, if you haven't already, getting on DataPlace. You can make requests on DataPlace for data from Australian government agencies. You can make requests under the data scheme or any other request. It doesn't have to be requests under the data scheme. So it's organisations that can get on DataPlace. So that might be your university, for example. So if you're not already on DataPlace, encourage you to get your organisation on DataPlace, and you can put in a request. The other thing you can do on DataPlace is start your journey to get accredited as a user. So if you're not already got an application in, then encourage you to be in contact with your university and get them going and be a part of the team that puts together a request for accreditation. There's information around on our website about how to get accredited. You can see the application form, you can see the checklist, and we've got what we call the expected characteristics we're looking for user accreditation. And they fall under those three headings I mentioned before: your data governance and management arrangements, secondly, your ICT and other security settings, and thirdly, your people capability. So that's probably, I think, the key points from me. I will just make one or two other points. I mentioned before that the scheme is all about increasing the availability and use of data held by Australian government agencies for public benefit. So that's really the game we're all in. And I think an important role for me is giving transparency or showing the work that you're doing and the good use you're making of Australian government data. And a recent, or public data more generally, a recent survey done by the Office for the Australian Information Commissioner. One of the questions it asked of the public was about your trust in researchers and others using public data for research. And encouragingly, it found that the trust is increasing from 36 to 42%. So that's encouraging, but 42%, we want it higher, right? So I just encourage you to let me know about the good use you're making of data and your good research findings and how they're playing into government policy, because that's a way that I think it's important. You know, one of the foundations of trust is we do what we say we're going to do. So if we say that we're making our data available for public benefit, then we want to show the public benefit that we're delivering. And I want to kind of amplify and show and demonstrate your good work. So that's my call out to you, is to let me know about the work that you're doing, and that's work that I can profile. And together there, we've got a joint role, a shared responsibility, if you like, to continue to build and increase the trust the public has in our work and in the use of the data. And then lastly, I've got a few ways here that you can stay connected with us. One of the things I do each month is a newsletter. And that's where also I'm looking for these, good use cases of public data and give them a run. And but also you can find out about what's going on in scheme and data more generally. We do have an education function, as I mentioned. So we have what we call our Wednesday webinars once a month, and they will cover off in the scheme, but also other topics such as building your data inventory. So other topics that help you in your data maturity journey. And so keen to have people participate in those, and also for you to give us feedback on how we're going so far and what other topics you might want us to cover off on. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, and then there's the website as well. And that gives you some guidance for scheme participants, but also guidance on things like developing your organisation's data inventory. And we'll be looking to expand the guidance material that we provide on our website over time. And again, we'll be guided by what it is that you're looking for in that space. So that's my probably key messages and 2 bits worth, Paula. I think I've said enough, and it'd be great to get some questions.
We do, actually. I've got 2 that I think might be linked. One person, Jan, has asked, what are the costs associated with obtaining the data? So I guess maybe that's a good place to start. What would it cost?
Yeah, great question. So one of the pieces of guidance we've released recently is around guidance on charges that data custodians can levy. And the legislation does permit Australian government agencies to charge for their data. But what the guidance does is says that they can only charge on a cost recovery basis. So it's limited to cost recovery. And we have tried to set up that guidance in a way that if you're putting forward bids to the ARC, for example, you can build that into your bid, and that then is covered if you do gain, if you're successful in your bid, then the funding would come with that, and then that's what you can use to gather the data.
Great, thank you. The next one is, does the data sharing agreement include intellectual property, from Peter? Actually, Peter's got 2 questions. I'll start with his sharing agreement and intellectual property.
Yeah, good question. Look, they would be things we would expect you to cover off on, and we give guidance around the data sharing agreement, but it is largely for the requester and the custodian to come to their own arrangement within those tram tracks, if you like. So provided you're in the right space, then it is for you to come to an agreement on how you want to handle those kinds of issues, such as intellectual property. And some of that will probably go a bit too, although if there's not a complete overlap there, I recognise, but one of the things you will need to deal with in your data sharing agreement is output from the use of the data and from the project and how that's handled. So they would be discussions we'd expect you to have with the custodians. And their issues, I guess, if you are finding the challenges as you go, then they're the kinds of things you can raise as complaints or issues you can raise with us, and we can look at some ways that we can provide you with guidance around that.
Terrific. Peter's other question, which he sneakily put in the chat, so he's in two places at once, is, are not-for-profits able to join DataPlace?
Yes, not-for-profits are able to join DataPlace. So I mentioned before that the scheme, the data scheme, participation there, at least at this stage, and this is where the Parliament landed, participation is limited to Australian government agencies, state and territory government agencies, and universities. But DataPlace can handle all of your requests, right? Not just requests under the data scheme. So yes, not-for-profits can register on DataPlace and make a request, but they won't be able to receive data under the data scheme. That makes sense.
Okay.
It may be,
Right.
if I put it this way, when an Australian government agency shares their data with you, they could be using a range of legal authorising pathways. They may have authorisation to share that data under their own legislation, and they can use that. So you could make a request on DataPlace and they could use that. In some cases, though, Australian government agencies can't, their legislation doesn't permit them to share the data, and that's where the legal authorisation under the data scheme kicks in. So that'll be something for us to traverse. I think one of the things I would say too is you can also think about partnering for NGOs. You can think about partnering with universities or state and territory government agencies or other Australian government agencies as a way to obtain or use the data, if you like. So that'll be particularly important to some of our research institutions who fall under that NGO category, and that's one of the challenges for us at the moment, to think about scheme participants from that perspective. And we'll mention that there is a review of the legislation that must commence at least by April 2025 and be concluded in April 2026. And that will be an opportunity to look at participation in the scheme, and so encourage people to share with us information about their experiences, so that can go to informing the review.
Okay. Helen wants to know whether it's possible to use a standard Medicines Australia CTRA agreement instead of a data sharing agreement, because the CTRA agreement already includes intellectual property.
Yeah, well, under the data scheme, we'll be looking for you to use the data sharing agreement that's on DataPlace. Hopefully you'll find a lot of parallels there, and that is what then gives you the best chance of complying with the scheme. But I think this is a bit of a learning journey for us all. I'm sure as people begin to use the data sharing agreements that we've made available, there's what we call a non-data scheme or a general data sharing agreement template available on DataPlace. When I say it's a template, it's actually a clause bank that's drawn down as you answer your questions, and then there is data scheme, data sharing agreement that's available there. So I guess if you can work with the custodian really to come up with the arrangement that suits you, but is in step with the data scheme if you're sharing under the legal authorisation framework of the Data Availability and Transparency Act. I hope that makes sense.
No, it does. Thank you very much. And then we have a last question, I think, from Suzanne in the Q&A, which is a bit complicated. As an individual, to ensure trust, I should have co-ownership of the data about myself, ease of access to check that it's accurate and has not been manipulated or misinterpreted. Does the scheme provide for that, or is that covered under other acts?
Yeah, so that will be good point, and that's primarily will be covered under the Privacy Act, but the Data Availability and Transparency Agreement works very closely and in step with the Privacy Act. So it doesn't detract from the Privacy Act in any way. It's reinforcing and building on the Privacy Act. So and the handling of personal data is pretty critical to the whole show. So, and I mentioned before the role of the data service provider with de-identification and data integration is quite key. But also the other thing I just mentioned there is keep an eye out on the amendments to the Privacy Act that the Commonwealth Government is pursuing. And that is about giving greater agency to individuals around their data.
Yes, I think that's going to be a fairly lengthy process because it's an old act and there's a lot of changes coming through.
Yeah.
Helen has a further question saying, is the data sharing agreement to be used nationwide or just for jurisdictions?
So we'd encourage people to use the general data sharing agreement for any sharing that they're doing. It's there available to you as a public good, if you like. For the data scheme, then it's that data sharing agreement will be available to all the scheme participants, and so that will be nationwide. And I guess a broader sort of point about the scheme and the data sharing agreements and those safeguards that I went through, they are all about, we're hoping South Australia will accept it. Yeah, just picking up on the chat there. But we're hoping that it's about lifting all boats, right? It's about strengthening our data maturity across all of our players and getting us around common language and common concepts, and using those and applying those in a consistent way. And we hope that means that there's, those good practices then are more widespread, but also we hope that there's some efficiencies in this, right? Working with data is a tough and it's hard work, and we hope that we can make it easier for you. You know what steps you need to go through, you know what good looks like, and you're using common language, and the person you're talking to is using that same language back. And DataPlace is offering you some tools about how to do it easier as well. So it makes your job easier, and you can spend time on probably the stuff that you enjoy more, which is the analysis of the data and writing up the results of your research and getting it published. That's what we want to see. Yeah.
Excellent. Wonderful. Gayle, thank you so much. We really appreciate giving us time out of your extremely busy day. And well, what can I say? Thank you very, very much indeed.
Okay, that's